Right, afternoon everyone. Look, I'll give you a quick preview of some of the bilaterals that we've engaged with this morning, and then the opportunity just to have any questions that you'll be interested in. I had the opportunity this morning with the Minister of Foreign Affairs to sit down with Prime Minister Sogavare of the Solomon Islands. It was a useful opportunity to catch up face to face. We've obviously had engagements over the phone, but with borders reopening and the chance to gather here, that was a chance to speak openly about our different perspectives on issues over the last 6 to 12 months. I reiterated again to Prime Minister Sogavare just the importance of our relationship with the Solomons, and you will have heard from his own comments him highlighting the ongoing importance of the relationship between the Solomons and New Zealand to him and to the Solomon Islands. We discussed within that the role that the New Zealand police have played for a long time around capability and capacity building and a community-based policing approach. I'll ask the Minister in a moment to expand on our intentions to continue with that work and in fact extend that work. We also discussed our perspectives on security arrangements in the region. I again reiterated the fact that New Zealand is strongly supportive of the fact that there will be many aid and development partners in our region, and there have been for many years. But when those relationships tip into the space of being related to security, that's an area where the wider Pacific family has a deep interest. I also expressed clearly that it would be New Zealand's deep concern to see anything that contributed to the militarisation of our region. On that, the Prime Minister agrees. His expression was that it is not in the Pacific family or indeed Solomon Islands' interest to see the militarisation of our region. So there is common ground there for us. And I believe there's common ground amongst Pacific Island Forum members on this matter as well. And when we have that common ground, we can build on it. I also had the opportunity to meet with the Prime Minister of Fiji, obviously, who is very busy chairing and navigating for us as a forum family, the Leadership Forum, and also the period leading up to resolve some of the issues that have been raised by members from Micronesia. I had the opportunity to sign the Suva agreement. And I think the clear message you hear from members of the forum is we have an agreement, we have a way forward. The door will always be open for Kiribati, and we of course hope that they will choose at some stage to rejoin the forum family. We also had the opportunity to discuss issues that are shared by New Zealand and Fiji, including issues around climate change and the aspirations our PIF may have in the future around mitigation and adaptation, and perhaps some goals we might set for ourselves. I'm going to ask Minister Mahuta to speak in a little bit more detail around the announcements we're making around the engagement of the New Zealand Police in the Solomon Islands.
Thank you, Prime Minister. In relation to the value that the Solomon Islands places on New Zealand's contribution in terms of policing, we've agreed to extend the existing arrangements for 2 years, and in addition to that, provide about $8.5 million to be able to enable the police to undertake their existing work in the Solomons, which is actually a part of our community policing approach and does work well for the Pacific. That will also ensure that through the duration of that extension, we're able to review those arrangements, and it will build on the ongoing discussions that we have with the Solomons. One of the things I want to highlight is the high value that the Solomons places on our policing contingent in the region and in the Solomons in particular.
Okay, I'll be happy to take questions. Yeah, Barbara.
Prime Minister, to what the US put on the table, also given the fact that their presence here is a departure from normal forum protocol.
Well, look, you've seen, and in particular in Palau, Pacific Island Forum members make a very direct request of the United States when it comes to the Tuna Treaty. You've seen now the United States respond to that. They've put back their offer. It broadly looks to meet the expectations that the forum has set. And they've added to it their expectations on how they'll engage with the forum and the Pacific generally going forward. Look, for a long time, I think you will have heard members of the Pacific Island Forum calling for greater engagement with the United States, be it on fishing matters or more generally on aid, development and economic aspirations. Seeing today the United States respond to that directly, and from our perspective, that is useful.
Prime Minister, what do you make of the fact of that extensive list of efforts announced by the United States, no mention of action on climate change?
Oh, well, look, ultimately, if you are responding to the Pacific Islands priorities, and they've very much said that that is what they intend to do, climate change is number one on that agenda. And you'll see embedded within that announcement very much a focus on responding to where it is the Pacific wants to see those efforts focused. And so in my mind, that's a given. If you want to work alongside the Pacific, you'll be working on climate change issues.
But that funding tripled under the South Pacific Tuna Treaty. That's by no means guaranteed, given it needs to be approved by Congress each year. So is there really sort of tangible action on climate from the US in these announcements?
Well, just on the Tuna Treaty, obviously there has been the ongoing funding of the treaty. This is the latest round. I think obviously there would be an expectation if that offer is being made that it would then be fulfilled by Congress. So I think that's the expectation that the Pacific Island Forum will come away with. On climate, again, you know, I would absolutely take it as a given that if you have a partner coming in and saying we're here to support the priorities as set out by the Pacific Island Forum, it is an absolute given that you will then therefore be investing in climate change. It is the number one issue for this region, and I think no one's under any illusion that that is where the focus is.
You previously described the Solomon Beijing Pact as deeply concerning.
Yes.
Today was your first face-to-face with
Yep.
Manasi Sogolwari. How are you feeling exiting that bilateral about the situation at large?
One thing I did reiterate is that it would be our view that it would be helpful to have greater transparency. At the moment, obviously, we don't have that text publicly available, but to be able to convey very strongly New Zealand's views, but to find that common ground, and that is that shared view on the militarisation of our region. That is at least an area where we can see that there's some foundation to that conversation now. There's some agreement around what we believe would be, very unhelpful for our region, deeply concerning, and take us backwards. So to see that agreement on that, I think is useful.
Did he speak to why he hadn't been more transparent about it?
Oh, you will have. I'll just reflect his own comments. He's reflected, I think, before that's because of both parties needing to agree around the public release.
So it's not a Solomon's issue?
Well, that's the way he's expressed the reason it hasn't been released. So I can only reflect back on that commentary.
Are you likely to ask for a demilitarization of the zone, given that there are so many things going on with treaties? You
will have seen from some of the recent comments that we've made around New Zealand's foreign policy that squarely within that comes, yes, our view that multilateralism and the rules-based order. Secondly, values third place. But when we talk about place in the Pacific, it's not just about the priorities of the Pacific being elevated. It is also about us being very clear about what we expect not to happen as much as what we expect to happen. We want action on climate change, but we don't want, for instance, the trade-off of those relationships to be an expectation that those who partner with us are able to militarise our region.
You mentioned yesterday that you would also be looking at whether or not there have been discrepancies in New Zealand's support, the Solomon seeing it as discrepancies. Did you sort of get any light on that?
Yeah, so again, just to again give the context of that comment, Australia, New Zealand have had engagement with the Solomon Islands and been involved in security arrangements for a number of years. When the recent issues arose and New Zealand was called upon, we responded. And so I simply reiterated to the Prime Minister, should those needs arise in the future, we are already there. We are there to support you. If there are issues that you believe we are not meeting, that have led you to call upon others, then tell us. And so that's the kind of nature of the conversation we're able to have freely and frankly with one another.
In relation to that, what discussions did you have about the New Zealand Solomon's maritime security plan that's under development? Nade talked about that last month.
Yeah.
Has there been any progress?
No, so at this stage, you're very much talking again at officials level on that front, but it's not unusual for us to engage in that area, because of course, alongside climate change, protecting some of those revenue sources, in particular the issue of illegal fisheries, at the same time extreme weather events and the impact that can have, the ability for us to reach and conduct surveillance in the aftermath of weather events or around illegal fisheries, really important. So that's often the starting point for conversations within our region. At the moment, this is very early days, so I don't really have too much more to add on that.
On your recent visit to the Great Nation of Australia, you secured an agreement to look into pathways to citizenship for Kiwis in Australia. Does New Zealand owe it to the Pacific family to give better pathways to residents for Pacific workers in that?
Hey, a great question. In fact, one of the conversations that I've been having with our Pacific partners and neighbours has been around skills, the role of RSC, and particularly in this period of recovery. Now, what has struck me is that the skill shortages that New Zealanders experience is being experienced in the Pacific region. Here in Fiji, they've seen a rapid increase in the number of tourists coming into Fiji since the borders opened. And they are concerned about the loss of skills from within Fiji to other tourist destinations such as Australia and New Zealand. So this is where I think we have to be mindful that some schemes that we perceive to be as aid and development opportunities, such as RSC, can also have an impact, which is why we need to work closely together. Prime Minister Fiame raised this issue herself in the conversations with the Fijian Prime Minister, very similar. We have to be careful about how we run those schemes that we don't actually lead to skills loss.
So those are the views of Pacific governments. What about
They
the
are.
views of Pacific Islanders and people?
Yeah, well, look, of course, we have to be mindful of the fact that if we're making our own, raising our own issues around skill shortages, that we're not blind to when governments raise those issues with us as well. That doesn't mean that there isn't a role to play, but as I reflect on Prime Minister Fiame's comments, RSC was originally designed to also address perhaps unemployment and create opportunities for those who may not have work opportunities within country. Let's make sure that the schemes are still operating that way, because I think those are the basis on which we'd all agree that's helpful then to both nations.
On the US,
I'll come here and then I'll come back here.
I mean, on that, Phil Piper
Yeah.
talked about establishing a Pacific preference for mobility visas, saying, bring in skilled, semi-skilled workers. Are those concerns why there's been no progress on that? I didn't see that in the immigration.
No, I wouldn't say so. I think it's actually because we're all just moving back to the normalisation and trying to then get a sense of how to sustain our economies with the resurgence and restart of tourism. Of course, for Samoa, they haven't even started that yet, so it's very hard to gauge some of those issues. What I would say, take Samoa as an example, there's already quota there. We haven't yet re-established how we will ensure that we're making up for the closure, the time when that hasn't been able to be acted upon. So we've put the ball back in the court of Samoa to say, look, you let us know how we can make sure we take an equitable approach and play a bit of catch up on some of those schemes. So really it's just because we're reopening so early on. I did promise you one here. Then I'll come here and then I might just finish and see if Barbara's got a finish up.
On the US announcement, the Fijian Prime Minister talked about it, meaning that the US will become a great partner like never before. Do you agree with that sentiment? Oh,
look, that'll ultimately be up to the forum to determine. Once, it's always for everyone, it's going to be the relationships they build, the action we see. And so I think this forum has always been one where words are important, but so are the relationships and the actions that we see.
And on what the forum will determine tomorrow in terms of the leaders' retreat, what are you looking forward to most and what are you hoping tangibly will come out of that?
You know, one thing I really enjoy about the Pacific Island Forum, and those who have covered it before will know that it's not a set-piece forum. Some of the forums in which we engage, a lot of work goes on behind the scenes. The forum's no different in that regard, but it is ultimately driven by leaders. It is free and frank. It's the chance to have an exchange of ideas, concerns, common ground. We call it family, and I can tell you in the way that the leaders' dialogue is conducted, it is. Yeah.
On Chinese interference in the forum, you didn't have anything to share yesterday. There's been reports today that some Chinese officials were kicked out of an event earlier today. Have you been briefed on this? Do you have
look, I heard and saw some of the commentary, but I can't really comment much beyond what I saw or was told was on Twitter. And so ultimately that would be a matter for the forum organisers really to respond to.
Would it be appropriate for Chinese officials to show up if they weren't invited?
Oh, look, my general view is that that it's for hosts to determine the way that meetings operate. for them to set the expectation of who's able to access meetings. And once those expectations are set, it's upon us all to follow and respect those. But I'll leave it to the host to speak to whether or not that did or didn't occur. Yeah. I will just tell them we've just a New Zealand press conference, so I will stick to the New Zealand gallery. Go ahead.
This morning you said that there's a lot more money to be done at home. Māori women still making up half of the female prison population
Yeah.
in Aotearoa. Are you confident that the government is doing enough to bring some of it down?
We have specific strategies, all focused on, what can ultimately will both bring down our rates of imprisonment, but also, very importantly, ensure our communities are safe. Often we have, in those communities where we have high imprisonment rates, we also have higher rates of victimisation. They are most often the communities that are the victims of crime as well. So in designing these strategies, it is about safety, but it's about also seeing that decrease. That's why it's got to be about what are we doing to increase employment opportunities, skills and training when we do have individuals who are in prison, and making sure that we addressed all of those issues that are causing the offending in the first place and wrap around our support in that around whānau, not just the offender.
On gender equality,
Yeah.
trans advocates here in Fiji have said that they often feel like they're left out of the conversation. Is that concerning to you?
Oh, look, for us, it is about addressing all areas where we see inequality and discrimination. There's a lot of mahi to be done here, a lot of work that we collectively are doing alongside Fiji. I think, the progress that they're making, particularly on behalf of women, is marked. You can see it. But I think we'd all acknowledged within generally the Pacific, we have a lot of work to do amongst our LGBTIQ+. Demonstrating they have New Zealand solidarity, I think is really important.
Prime Minister, Kiribati
Yeah.
is completely isolated now and is refusing to take calls from leaders. What is your concern, given their close relationship with China, about the direction they're taking and the impact on the wider region?
I think what's really important for us is that regardless of the decision that Kiribati has made for now, that the door is still open, the relationships are still important, and that we are still there. And on New Zealand's behalf, I can certainly say we are. They are in the depths of the moment of an incredibly difficult situation, significant drought, issues with access to drinking water. And that's why, for instance, we've announced that we're putting further funding in for desalination to support that population. They've made this decision now. We won't walk away from our relationship. They're important to us and they're important to the region.
Prime Minister, just for domestic colleagues, just quickly on COVID.
Yeah, and then Michael, yep.
I think COVID cases are going up again in New Zealand. Is there any consideration to moving to red?
The consideration for us are what are the measures that will make a difference to our numbers. We know what they are. Isolation if you have COVID, that markedly brings down infection rates of others. Your household isolating with you is equally important. Mask use and vaccination. Those are three things that will have some of the biggest impact on our numbers. So yes, while they are going up in particular, I would just ask people, even if you've had COVID, we are seeing reinfection again. Please wear your mask. If you haven't been boosted, and particularly you're immunocompromised or 50 plus, go out and get that next booster. And for others, if you have COVID or your family member does, isolate. Those are three principles that many countries don't continue to use. We do, and they are the most important things we could be doing right now, far and away above the extra measure, which is gathering limits, which in this environment will not have the same impact.
So no red consideration?
No, because again, you'll see Minister Viral tomorrow talking a little bit more about what we can do to focus even more on those three important principles I've just shared. You'll forgive me, we have an extended New Zealand delegation on beyond our usual New Zealand gallery, so I will just make sure I catch you all.
Program this morning and
Yeah.
tell me tonight about leadership.
Yeah.
How do you feel female leadership in the Pacific has developed or evolved over the years?
Oh.
And if it hasn't, where are the gaps and what would you like to see the likely outcome?
Great question. Look, in the years that I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work across and with Pacific Island Forum members, it's fair to say, in some cases you'll see extraordinary change through the likes of the Prime Minister of Samoa, for instance, really historic. But in other ways, I think we all acknowledge it's not just about leadership and who happens to hold political office. It's about what we all do at every level of leadership. I'll speak to New Zealand because until we can stand hand on heart and say that we've completely eradicated gender inequality, I find it hard to stand on any podium and tell anyone else what they need to do. I'll stand alongside, but I think we need to get our own house in order as well. So that means making sure that we remove the barriers for women to enter into politics. It means addressing those barriers to women being able to make the choices and determine their own futures, and that includes making sure that we have financial and economic independence for our women. And it means addressing gender-based violence, which is an extraordinary barrier to participation in our society. And until we each demonstrate that we've made progress on those, then we will each have work to do. I'll come back to Michael. I'm sure that I'm covering off your questions in these very long answers. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
How confident are you that won't disrupt any of the unity that this forum is designed to address? And also, are you confident that this is not just a power play and it's going to be lasting and enduring?
Here, I would say that having been a member of the Pacific Island Forum and attended a handful of forums now, each leader and each country ultimately will determine the relationships that they have with others. And it's not new to have a number of countries who partner in our region. Perhaps there is, as I said yesterday, a greater level of assertiveness from some. Some have waxed and waned. But what is constant is that the Pacific charts its own course. And even when there is pressure on that course, that ultimately just means that it's more important than ever that we come together, that we take a family-based approach, we try and iron out where we might have differences, and where issues affect each of us, that we try as much as possible to work through the differences that we have. So yes, a bit more amplified than usual, but is it different? Is it any different than it's been before to have quite a few players in the region? They've been around for a while.
And on the retreat tomorrow, the last face-to-face retreat, where it's there quite over time.
Yes.
Discussions around climate change.
Yeah.
And so how do you see tomorrow going? And do you see this being more of a unified approach?
Certainly look, I will never preempt the discussion that leaders have. Those who have covered forums for a while will know that even when there is actually a relative amount of common ground, we can still have quite good, lengthy discussions. So that won't necessarily be an indication of there being a difference of view, more the fact that we really get this opportunity, and we've got 3 years of talanoa to catch up on here with this meeting. It is fair to say that one of the things that caused lengthy conversation last time, you do see more common ground on, and that is just the threat of climate change, but B, the fact that it's incumbent on all of us to demonstrate our own commitment within our own nations. All right, I'll let you finish here.
Tomorrow morning, Prime Minister, you looking forward to a new shirt?
I think you'll see it'll be a new dress. Look, it's part of the family tradition. And you'll notice that when we've hosted in that way, we have inflicted that on others as well. But we're blessed here in Fiji. I think we've seen beautiful prints, beautiful designs, a real showcasing of the talent that's here. Yeah, absolutely.
Ko te mea nui kia āhei ki te whakapakari ake te huarahi tōtika mō ngā wāhine kia ike panuku me ki tērā taumata, kia whakatōpū ki te whakapakari taua wāhanga mō rātou anō. Mo te painga mō a rātou nei hāpuri anō hoki.
Tore te kaumā toru o rau ngā wāhine o Fiji, te roto i tō rātou whare pāremata, engari rima te kau o rau, o te population o te taupori tāmata o kone. Kia whakaaro me piki ake tērā te tauranga?
O wai huma Fiji anō e kōrero mō a rātou nei taumata, engari ko te hiahia o te premier o mātou nei, me piki ake te wāhanga me te huarahi hei hāpai ake i a tātou nei wahine. Aha kua kowai, aha kua nōwhia, ina ka taia ki te uru i roto i a rātou nei paremata, ka taia te kitie i ngā panonitanga mō ngā whakahaeretanga katoa mō ngā whānau, mō ngā hāpori, ara mō ngā kaupapa e whai ake nei e ngā wāhine kia noho pai ngā whānau.
In the last few weeks we've seen reports of Indigenous women bearing facial markings being refused entry into restaurants in hospitality spaces in Australia. Ko eke rā nei te wā, me panoni rātou i te tikanga o kaua e rāna o e tūwhinotia e nei wā.
Well, New Zealand's got some experience in that, so what we can do is demonstrate ways in which you can break down stereotypes around traditional, cultural, facial moko, which are about identity and nothing to be afraid of. And the more that we can participate in educating the public around the importance of cultural markings, then that in itself will have a reverberating effect around how society responds.
All right, thank you everyone.
Ask you about America's